When Taehyung refused to stand beside Jungkook during a major broadcast, fans were left speechless. What happened behind the scenes will change everything. No, not next to him. The sentence sliced through the air like a cold blade, quiet yet thunderous, spoken through clenched teeth as Taehyung turned slightly to his manager backstage. Cameras were rolling. The event was minutes away from going live. Jungkook, already standing in position, blinked once, twice, as if trying to convince himself he'd misheard. But Taehyung didn't look at him, not even once. The tension backstage was unnatural. Lights were being tested, monitors buzzed, staff voices crackled through headsets. Yet a silence settled between the two men at the center of it all. A staff member tried to redirect Taehyung gently, whispering, "They've already marked the spots. Live in 30 seconds." Taehyung stood firm, his hands balled into fists inside the deep pockets of his coat. "Switch it! I'm not standing next to him." Jungkook's jaw tightened. He didn't say a word, but the corners of his lips dropped ever so slightly, that subtle betrayal only visible to someone who knew him too well. Jimin, caught in the middle both physically and emotionally, glanced between them with a forced smile, masking panic behind his eyes as he quickly stepped up to stand between them before the camera rolled. The broadcast started. To fans watching around the world, the show appeared flawless. The lights glittered, the outfits dazzled, and the voices harmonized like they always did. But those watching closely noticed something off. Taehyung never looked Jungkook's way, not even once. Not during the group introductions, not during the games, not during the final bows. For a group celebrated for their chemistry, their bond, and their unbreakable connection, this sudden coldness was jarring. The fan community erupted within minutes. Number "Where is the Taekook love?" and number "Taehyung avoided Jungkook" began trending globally. Clips circulated online showing the micro-expressions, Taehyung's shifting posture, Jungkook's silent sighs, the way Jimin kept throwing glances at both as if hoping to glue the crack shut with nothing but presence. Behind the scenes, the truth was far more complicated than any fan could guess. It hadn't started that day. The rift had been quietly forming, like frost spreading under glass. Days earlier, during a late-night rehearsal, Jungkook had overheard something he was never meant to hear: Taehyung's voice, raw and tired, telling a crew member, "I don't know who he is anymore." The words weren't screamed. That made them worse. They were whispered, vulnerable, as if Taehyung himself wasn't sure he wanted them to be true. Jungkook hadn't confronted him. He couldn't. Instead, he let the weight of those words sink into his chest, into his bones, and he'd shown up the next day with the same bright eyes, the same joking tone, but something in him had cracked. Taehyung felt it. Of course, he did. The silence between them became sharp. Polite nods replaced shared laughter. Eyes avoided each other like opposing magnets, until it became easier to stand far apart than pretend nothing had changed. But what had changed? The truth was, neither of them knew how to talk anymore. After everything they'd shared, late-night confessions on hotel rooftops, songs written in secret, glances exchanged like sacred vows, they had both changed, just in different directions. Taehyung, increasingly quiet, private, wary of fame's intrusion into every part of his being. Jungkook, explosive with ambition, wanting to connect, to express, to do. The same fire that once brought them close now burned differently. The night after the event, a hotel room stayed lit, long past midnight. Jungkook sat by the window, hoodie pulled over his head, fingers nervously tugging at the fabric. His phone lit up with messages, Jimin checking in, their manager reminding him of the next day's shoot. None were from Taehyung. On the other side of the city, Taehyung sat in a recording booth, alone. He'd canceled dinner with the others, claiming fatigue, but his mind was racing. Every lyric he sang felt like a lie. How could he sing about unity when he couldn't even look at the person who used to be his anchor? They were both haunted by the same memory. Seoul, winter 2023. A night of clarity, a night of breaking, when words were exchanged under the breath. In the cold, words neither could take back. "You don't need me anymore," Taehyung had said then, a bitter smile playing on his lips. Jungkook had shouted back, "Stop assuming what I feel!" But feelings didn't wait for clarity. They shifted, morphed, and sometimes got buried beneath ego and pride. And now here they were, two souls orbiting each other but refusing to collide. It took two more appearances before fans noticed something even stranger. Taehyung had started arriving late. Jungkook began leaving early. Their schedules, once aligned like clockwork, now felt like a dance choreographed to avoid contact. And Jimin, poor Jimin, was always the one standing in the middle, forced to bridge a gap that neither of them would acknowledge out loud. In private, Jimin tried. One night after practice, he cornered Jungkook in the hallway, voice low and careful. "Cook, you need to talk to him." Jungkook just stared ahead. He made his choice. Jimin shook his head. "No, he made a mistake. So did you. That's not the same thing." Meanwhile, Taehyung was writing again. Alone in his home studio, he scribbled lyrics he'd never show anyone. Not yet. His journal filled with pages that read like letters never sent. Pages that began with, "I thought you'd always understand me." But it wasn't all bitterness. Beneath the frost, something still beat quietly. In moments when Jungkook looked toward Taehyung by accident and quickly turned away. In times when Taehyung's hand would twitch, as if wanting to reach out, but never did. In songs they performed side by side, yet felt worlds apart, the harmony still perfect, even if their hearts weren't. And then came the awards night. All seven stood together. Cameras flashed, speeches were made. But when it came time for the group photo, Jungkook moved toward the left. Taehyung stepped to the right. A pause. A moment so brief, yet infinite. Jin looked at both of them, eyes narrowed. Namjoon let out a subtle breath. Hoseok's hand twitched toward Taehyung's elbow. And again, Jimin moved into the middle, smiling like he could will the world to peace. But the photo was taken, and once again, the two stood apart. And that photo, cold, perfect, distant, would be the one plastered across headlines the next day. "Taehyung refuses to stand next to Jungkook," one read. "The end of Taekook?" read another. But what the headlines missed was everything beneath the surface. The ache, the confusion, the silence born not of hatred, but of too much love left unsaid for too long. What they missed was the two men staring at that photo later, alone in different rooms, wishing they had done something differently. That maybe they still could, because sometimes the deepest wounds aren't carved by betrayal but by distance, by silence, by the fear of one more painful conversation. And sometimes, healing starts not with grand gestures but with a simple, quiet word. "Hey." The clock in Jungkook's hotel room ticked past 3 a.m., but he hadn't moved from his spot on the windowsill. The city lights reflected dimly in his tired eyes, the glow of soul stretching out before him like a silent stage where too many memories had been etched. His phone vibrated softly against the side table again. He didn't check it. He already knew it was Jimin, for the third time that night. The first was a simple, "Are you okay?" The second, a longer message filled with hope, frustration, and a gentle nudge toward reconciliation. Jungkook hadn't responded to either, not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know how. What was there to say when everything that mattered couldn't fit in a message? He leaned his forehead against the cool glass, remembering the way Taehyung used to talk during nights like this, how his voice would drop into a softer, almost lazy register, his words always laced with dreams or quiet truths. They had shared nights staring at these same lights, throwing their futures into the stars and laughing about things that didn't matter until they did. And now he wouldn't even stand next to him. There had been silence before, disagreements, hurt feelings, but never this coldness, never this refusal to even acknowledge his presence. Taehyung hadn't said a word to him in days, and the worst part was Jungkook was starting to believe that maybe he deserved it. Maybe somewhere along the line he had changed into someone Taehyung no longer recognized. He wanted to fight that thought, but it echoed too loudly in his mind to ignore. Across town, Taehyung sat alone on his balcony, a blanket draped over his shoulders despite the chill. A half-finished song sat on the notebook beside him, the last lyric scratched out angrily. He had tried writing it from Jungkook's perspective at first, something he used to do when they argued. It helped him understand. It helped him forgive. But this time, he couldn't. Not yet. Because this time, the silence between them felt chosen, deliberate. Like Jungkook had made peace with the distance and Taehyung was the only one still clinging to what they used to be. He had told the manager not to put him beside Jungkook on stage. The moment had passed quickly, but the aftershock lingered, and he knew the world had noticed. The trending hashtags were relentless. The videos were dissected frame by frame, fans analyzing their posture, the way their eyes never met, the tension between them like an invisible wall. He hated it. Not the speculation, not the fan theories or the dramatic edits. He hated that it was true, that something had broken and neither of them knew how to fix it. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and hovered over Jungkook's contact. His thumb trembled slightly. He typed out a message. "I can't sleep either." He stared at it, then deleted it. In the days that followed, the group's schedule didn't let up. A commercial shoot, 2 radio interviews, a surprise live stream, and endless rehearsals. And through it all, they danced like professionals, spoke like brothers, and smiled like nothing was wrong. But it was wrong. Every time Taehyung passed Jungkook in the hallway, there was a moment of hesitation, a breath held, a thought left unspoken. Every time Jungkook watched Taehyung laugh with the others, there was a flicker of longing, a silent apology caught in his throat. Jimin was the only one brave enough to address it head-on. One night after rehearsal, he pulled Jungkook aside. "Do you even care that he's hurting?" Jungkook flinched. "Don't say that." "Then times do times something," Jimin snapped. "Because I'm tired of pretending everything's okay. We all are. And he's not okay." Jungkook opened his mouth, but couldn't form a response. Instead, he sank onto the couch behind him, his hands burying in his hair. "I don't know where to start." "Then start from the truth," Jimin said quietly. "Whatever that is." The truth? What even times was times the truth anymore? That he missed Taehyung? That he still replayed their last real conversation over and over in his head? That part of him felt like he was grieving something that hadn't even died? That night, he sent a message. Just one. "Let me explain. Please." No response came. Not that night. Not the next. But 3 days later, during the final rehearsal for an upcoming award show, the stage manager called for formations. As usual, Jungkook took his place. And Taehyung stood where he always used to next to him. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't warm. It wasn't even comfortable. But it was something. Their arms brushed as they ran through the choreography. Taehyung didn't move away. Jungkook didn't look, but he felt it. A tremor in his chest, a thawing. After the final beat, when the music faded and silence fell over the arena, neither of them spoke. But Taehyung exhaled, and that was enough. Later that night, Taehyung knocked on Jungkook's door. When it opened, the air between them was heavy. Jungkook looked like he hadn't slept, his eyes glassy and anxious. Taehyung stepped inside without a word and stood there, arms crossed, the silence stretched. But it wasn't hostile. It was just full. "I hated you," Taehyung said softly. Jungkook's breath caught. "Not because of what you did, but because you didn't fight for me when I pulled away. I thought you didn't want me to." "I times did asterisk." Taehyung's voice cracked. "But I wanted you to times it enough to stop me." Jungkook looked at him for a long time, his throat aching. "I was scared." Taehyung stepped closer. "Me too." They didn't hug, they didn't cry, but something shifted in the air, an understanding, raw and real. A beginning, maybe, or a continuation of something that had never truly ended. In the weeks that followed, fans noticed a change. Small things. Taehyung smiling when Jungkook spoke during interviews. Jungkook nudging Taehyung during dance practice bloopers. The occasional glance exchanged tentative, but softer. During their next group V Live, a comment popped up on the screen. "Are Tae and JK okay now?" Taehyung saw it. He didn't hesitate. "We're learning," he said. "That's all we can do." And Jungkook, beside him for the first time in a long while, nodded with a quiet smile. In the end, it wasn't a dramatic reunion or a headline-worthy revelation. It was human, messy, real. Two people finding their way back through silence, pride, and pain. Not perfectly, but honestly. Because sometimes, standing next to someone means more than anyone else can understand. And refusing to do so doesn't always mean hate. Sometimes, it just means you're still healing. Jungkook found himself waking up earlier than usual. The soft morning light barely filtering through the sheer curtains of his hotel room. The air was still, the kind of silence that felt more like a pause than peace. He lay still, listening to the distant sounds of the city waking up beyond the glass, buses grumbling, birds warbling weakly through the winter air. Distant honks, and yet none of it grounded him. His thoughts had already wandered to the hallway across from his own, where he knew Taehyung had returned late last night. He remembered the look on Taehyung's face when he walked into his room for the first time in weeks. Not angry, not even cold, just tired, worn down by the silence that had gone on too long. That night had not fixed anything, but it had cracked something open, enough for light to seep through. Jungkook sat up, rubbed his eyes, and moved on instinct. He didn't plan it, he just stood, grabbed his jacket, and opened the door to the hallway like muscle memory was guiding him. He hesitated only once before knocking softly. The door opened seconds later, as if Taehyung had been waiting too. Neither of them spoke at first. The tension between them was different now. Not heavy like it had been before, but raw, exposed. Jungkook saw the darkness under Taehyung's eyes, and Taehyung took in the nervous fidgeting of Jungkook's fingers against his sleeves. These were signs only they could recognize in each other. The world might never notice, but they did. "I was about to go for a walk," Taehyung said simply, stepping aside. "You wanna come?" Jungkook nodded, almost too quickly. They walked without a destination. Through narrow back streets behind the hotel, past shuttered cafes and quiet storefronts, where the city hadn't quite come alive yet. The cold bit at their cheeks, but neither of them complained. Their hands remained buried in their pockets, not touching, but still close. Jungkook occasionally glanced at Taehyung's profile, the way his scarf hid part of his face, how his brows stayed slightly furrowed, even in rest. Taehyung wasn't known for being unreadable. He was known for being layered, hard to pin down. Yes, but not cold. Never cold. And that's why it had hurt more than anything when he started pulling away. Jungkook finally spoke, voice barely above the crunch of gravel beneath their shoes. "Did I push you too far?" Taehyung didn't look at him, but he answered after a pause. "I don't think it was about pushing." "Then what was it?" "I think..." Taehyung breathed out, his voice caught between thought and confession. "I think I just felt like I was being left behind." Jungkook stopped walking. "Left behind?" Taehyung stopped too, but he still didn't turn. "You've been evolving so fast, in every direction, and it's beautiful. It is. But I started feeling like the parts of me you used to need, you don't anymore." Jungkook's throat tightened. He stepped closer, enough for their arms to almost brush. "That's not true. I still need you." Taehyung gave a bitter smile. "But you didn't say that when I started drifting. You let me go." Jungkook's hands clenched. "Because I was afraid if I held on too tight you'd resent me." Taehyung turned to face him finally, eyes clouded. "And I resented you for letting go so easily." The words cut deeper than either expected. They both stood still, hearts beating fast for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. This wasn't about one fight. This wasn't about fan theories or headlines or formation placements. This was about the quiet breaking of something that had been sacred. A closeness that once needed no words, and now couldn't survive without them. "I'm not good with words," Jungkook admitted, his voice cracking. "You know that, but I think I stopped telling you how much you mattered because I assumed you already knew." "I did," Taehyung whispered. "But sometimes people need to hear it anyway." The silence after that wasn't awkward. It was soaked in realization. Taehyung's shoulders dropped slightly, some invisible weightlifting. Jungkook reached out slowly, unsure, then rested a hand gently against Taehyung's arm. "I don't want to lose you," he said, and his voice didn't shake this time. "Not like that. Not over miscommunication. Not over pride." Taehyung looked at him, really looked, and nodded slowly. "Then let's stop trying to win. Let's just try to understand." That walk didn't end in dramatic reconciliation, but by the time they returned, something had softened. They began speaking more during practice, quietly, cautiously, but consistently. During meals, they no longer avoided sitting at the same table. During group events, they didn't need Jimin to stand between them anymore. The fandom noticed, of course. They always did. Edits began to surface again, noticing the way Taehyung laughed at one of Jungkook's jokes, or how Jungkook seemed to glance Taehyung's way during a live show and smile. But beyond the surface, there were still scars. They had dinners, just the two of them, where things felt almost normal, until one of them said something that reminded them of how things had fractured. Then the silence would return, not as heavy, but still present. One night, as they sat watching old performance videos in Taehyung's room, Jungkook turned to him. "Do you ever wish we could go back?" Taehyung thought for a moment. "No, I wish we'd handled the present better." Jungkook nodded. "Me too." Taehyung looked down at his drink. "But maybe this version of us is stronger. Because we're learning how to talk, how to say the things we used to hide." "I'm still bad at it," Jungkook admitted with a small laugh. "You're better than you think," Taehyung said softly. "You just need to stop assuming people know your heart." Jungkook looked at him for a long moment. "Then, let me try. Right now." And without any more hesitation, he said, "I missed you. Every day. Even when I was pretending I didn't." Taehyung's expression froze. Then it cracked, and he let out a soft breath. "I missed you too, even when I was pretending you didn't." The words weren't poetic. They weren't dramatic, but they were honest. And in that honesty, a bridge was rebuilt. Not instantly, not perfectly, but brick by brick. As promotions continued, as the group moved from city to city, stage to stage, there was laughter again. The kind that wasn't forced. There were shared glances that didn't feel loaded. There was space between them, but it wasn't filled with avoidance anymore. It was filled with choice. The choice to stay near, to be present, to not walk away. Months later, during an interview, the host asked a question. "Out of all of you, who do you think has grown the most emotionally this year?" Taehyung and Jungkook both glanced at each other. Jungkook said, "I think we've all grown, but some growth you don't see until you stop looking at the stage and look at what's behind it." The host smiled, confused. But the fans knew. The fandom always knew. Because real stories don't always unfold in public. Sometimes they unfold in quiet hallways, in tired eyes and unexpected texts, in late-night walks and unspoken apologies, in the refusal to give up, even when everything seems easier that way. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to stand next to someone again, even after you swore you wouldn't. Under the muted glow of the stage lights, Jungkook stood motionless behind the curtain, the hum of the crowd beyond a low thunder in his chest. It was their final show of the year, and everything, the pressure, the expectations, the weight of what they were rebuilding pressed into the space behind his ribs like a second heartbeat. He shifted slightly, fingers brushing the mic stand, but his gaze was locked forward, through the layers of velvet and light and silence, onto the space where Taehyung would soon stand. They hadn't talked much today. Not because anything was wrong, but because things were delicate now, sacred in a way that silence didn't necessarily mean distance. Sometimes it meant respect, space, letting the connection breathe on its own, instead of suffocating it with forced reconciliation. Still, Jungkook felt the nervous flutter in his stomach every time their eyes met. It was quieter now, gentler, but it lingered like a reminder of all they had endured and all that still waited between them. The music director gave the cue. They moved into position. As the curtains lifted, a blinding warmth spread across the stage, and the roar of the stadium crashed over them like a tidal wave. The intro began sharp beats, synchronized lights, the familiar rhythm that had become muscle memory. Jungkook's feet moved before his mind caught up, instincts honed through years of performance. And then, beside him, Taehyung. He didn't have to look to know he was there. He felt it. Like gravity realigning. Their shoulders brushed in choreography. Their voices blended on harmonies. Their steps matched like they used to. The difference was in the spaces between, in the way Taehyung's gaze softened when they passed one another on stage, in the way Jungkook's hand lingered just a second longer when he offered a high five during the transition. They were no longer performing a closeness that didn't exist. They were allowing the world to witness them, piecing it back together. Midway through the set list, the lights dimmed for a quieter number. It was a ballad they hadn't performed live in over a year, a song about longing, timing, and missed moments. Taehyung and Jungkook had recorded the harmony together when things were still easy, still light. Back when they finished each other's thoughts instead of dodging each other's shadows. As the intro played, Jungkook's hand trembled slightly around the mic. Taehyung began the verse. His voice was low, steady, laced with the kind of ache that came from memory, not acting. Jungkook watched him from the corner of his eye. felt the emotion rise in his chest before his own part arrived. When it did, he sang it differently than he had in the past. Slower, more deliberate, as if he were speaking directly to someone he never thought would hear him again. By the end of the song, the stadium had faded into a soft glow. The two of them stood at the front of the stage, the last note hanging between them like a thread. For a moment, no one moved. Even the fans seemed to hold their breath. Then, Taehyung turned slow, careful, and looked at Jungkook. Really looked. Jungkook didn't flinch away. He held his gaze, unspoken words spilling between them. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't part of the show, but the silence between them was louder than anything they had sung. After the concert, the backstage hallway was filled with applause, laughter, congratulations. Members high-fived each other, staff offered water bottles and warm towels, and phones buzzed with live fan reactions. Jungkook slipped away quietly, weaving through the sea of people until he found an empty dressing room and closed the door behind him. He stood in front of the mirror, sweat still glistening on his temples, heart still racing from the adrenaline. His eyes were glassy, not from exhaustion, but from that moment, that look, that connection on stage that told him things were truly beginning to heal.
He didn't hear the door open. He only felt the shift in the air when Taehyung entered. No words at first, just the soft thud of the door clicking shut. Jungkook turned slowly, and there he was, hair damp, jacket half off his shoulders, eyes still burning from the lights. They looked at each other, the dressing room suffocating in silence again. And then Taehyung stepped forward. "I thought I'd lost you," he said, the first to speak. Jungkook's throat closed. "You didn't, I was just too afraid to fight." Taehyung reached up, brushing a stray strand of hair from Jungkook's forehead. "We both were, but maybe the point isn't that we broke. Maybe it's that we're still here." Jungkook nodded. Then, barely above a whisper, "Do you think we'll get back to what we were?" "No," Taehyung replied honestly, "but I think we can become something better." And that somehow felt more important. Over the next few months, their dynamic began to shift in small, quiet ways. They started writing together again, not publicly, not for an album, just in the back corners of studios late at night when everyone else had gone home. The songs weren't perfect, some never made it past the first verse, but they were raw, honest, and filled with pieces of what they had never said aloud. In interviews, they still kept things professional, careful, but every so often the mask would slip, a shared laugh, a fond glance, a subtle inside joke that only long-time fans could recognize. And the fans noticed. They always noticed. They were invited to a variety show months later. A relaxed format, no choreography, just games, cooking, and conversation. At one point, the host brought out a friendship quiz, meant to test how well the members knew each other. When it came to Taehyung and Jungkook, the room tensed slightly, everyone aware of what had once been broken. But Taehyung answered every question correctly. Favorite late-night snack? The song Jungkook listens to when he's sad, what he mumbles in his sleep. And when it was Jungkook's turn, he didn't miss a beat either. The name of Taehyung's dog, his dream vacation, what he's afraid of but never admits. The final question, what's something you wish you had told him earlier? Jungkook looked at Taehyung, smile fading. That I needed you. Taehyung's expression shifted. He didn't smile back. He just reached forward and gently tapped Jungkook's hand. No words, just presence. After the cameras stopped and the laughter faded, Jungkook found Taehyung alone by the snack table, fiddling with a bottle cap. "You okay?" he asked. Taehyung nodded. "Yeah, just remembering." "Me too." They stood there in silence, surrounded by the echoes of their laughter, their fans, their past. Everything that had been heavy now felt light, not because it disappeared, but because they were carrying it together. Later that night, Jungkook posted a photo, just the two of them, no caption. Taehyung reposted it with a single word. "Learning." The comments flooded in, fans rejoiced. Some cried, some simply left hearts. But for the two of them, it wasn't about trending hashtags anymore. It was about making the choice day after day to show up, to be honest, to forgive, to grow. And in the quiet hours of the morning, long after the world had gone to sleep, Jungkook picked up his guitar. In the dim corner of the studio, he played a familiar melody. Taehyung's voice joined his a few bars later, soft, unsure at first, but then strong. And together they sang. No cameras, no audience, just two hearts finding their way back. One note at a time. The studio at 2 in the morning felt like another world, one removed from stages, from interviews, from rehearsals and artificial light. It was dim, warm, humming gently with old amps and the static crackle of a forgotten monitor screen in the corner. Taehyung sat cross-legged on the rug, his back against the wooden paneling, one hand loosely holding a lyric sheet with faint pencil smudges. Jungkook sat nearby, his fingers gently strumming a chord progression on the acoustic guitar, repeating it without thought, letting it breathe and shift with his mood. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even finished. But that was the point. They hadn't spoken much in the last hour and they didn't need to. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It had changed, grown into something companionable, safe, and perhaps more telling than any apology. Taehyung looked up at the ceiling, lips parted slightly as if searching for a melody in the corners of the room. The tune came slowly, unsure but tender, and Jungkook followed, adjusting the tempo to match. The harmony found itself like instinct, an echo of old days and muscle memory. For a brief second, Taehyung glanced at him, catching the smallest smile tugging at Jungkook's lips. It wasn't smug or confident. It was shy, real. And Taehyung smiled back, almost in disbelief at how easy this part still was. When the chorus faded, Jungkook let the final note hang before he placed the guitar beside him. He leaned back on his hands, head tilted, watching Taehyung with that unreadable look he had perfected over the years, equal parts admiration and hesitation. "You know," Jungkook murmured after a while, his voice low, rough with fatigue and emotion, "I kept asking myself if I should have chased you when you started pulling away." Taehyung's eyes flickered to him, unreadable. "And what did you decide?" Jungkook looked down. "That I should have, but I was too proud, too scared, and maybe too selfish." "You weren't selfish," Taehyung replied quietly. "You were hurt, so was I." The sentence lingered like dust in the air, illuminated in the soft light. Jungkook nodded, fingers curling slightly on the rug. "I thought you hated me," he admitted, breath hitching. "And when you didn't stand beside me that day on stage, it felt like confirmation, like I really had lost you." Taehyung's expression darkened, not in anger but in remorse. "I didn't hate you," he said. "I was afraid of what it meant to stand next to you again when we hadn't said the things that needed to be said. I didn't want to perform something I hadn't healed from." "And now," Jungkook whispered, "I think we're doing it right this time. Slow, real." They didn't say much after that. Taehyung stood eventually, brushing off his pants, walking toward the far side of the studio where the control board waited. He flipped a few switches, played back the last take, then turned as the soft track played over them both. His eyes weren't sad anymore. They were contemplative, deep, layered with everything unspoken and everything forgiven. Jungkook stood too, walking over to him, standing close but not touching. "Let's finish this," he said. "Not just the song, all of it." Taehyung nodded once. "Let's." The next morning, their group had a photo shoot. Nothing extravagant, just a casual campaign meant to highlight the group's natural chemistry. The photographer called for a relaxed pose, one where the members were standing side by side in staggered lines. A stylist handed each of them accessories, props. Jimin nudged Taehyung teasingly with a scarf, wrapping it loosely around his neck, then laughed when it fell lopsided. Jin stood in front, cracking a joke about how they'd all aged, and Namjoon rolled his eyes as expected. Then the photographer pointed toward Taehyung and Jungkook. "Can we have you two stand next to each other?" A brief pause. Jungkook didn't move, he waited. Taehyung didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, positioning himself beside Jungkook just like he used to. The room didn't react, but the members did. A glance from Jimin, a blink from Yoongi, and something tight eased from the air. Not everything needed to be spoken to be understood. As the camera clicked, Jungkook leaned slightly, just enough for their shoulders to align perfectly. Later that day, the photo went viral. Not because of the styling, not because of the brand, but because of the way Taehyung was looking at Jungkook in one frame, softly, not staged, as if caught mid-thought. The fans noticed, of course they did. Some cried, some screamed, some simply whispered, "They're okay now." But recovery wasn't linear. There were days when they still walked on eggshells, when one word could trigger an old bruise, when silence crept back in not as comfort but as avoidance. On those days it was harder, but they had made a quiet vow that night in the studio to try, to show up, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. One night after practice, Taehyung lingered behind as the others left. Jungkook was stretching alone, sweat-damp hair clinging to his neck, headphones in as he replayed a vocal take. He didn't notice Taehyung at first. Then a soft voice, still not happy with it. Jungkook looked up, pulling the earbuds out. "No, something feels off." Taehyung walked over, reaching for the mic. "Try it again. This time, don't think about perfect. Just sing it like you're telling me." Jungkook hesitated, then smiled slowly. He took a breath, let it out shakily, and sang. And it was different. Later, Taehyung played back the recording. "That's it." "You sure?" Jungkook asked. Taehyung turned to him, voice steady. "I'd know your truth anywhere." That night, Jungkook couldn't sleep. He scrolled through his camera roll, past old tour photos, messy videos from their trainee days, candid shots of Taehyung grinning under golden hour light, and stopped at a single picture from last year. A blurry selfie Taehyung had taken in a dark hallway after one of their arguments. They weren't smiling, but they were side by side. Jungkook stared at it for a long time, then opened his notes app. He began typing. Not lyrics, not a message. A letter. "Taehyung, I should have said all of this out loud, but I never knew how." He didn't send it, not yet, but writing it felt like placing another stone on the path they were building back to each other. Weeks passed, seasons shifted, a new project began, an album meant to reflect their growth not just as artists but as people. During planning, the idea of a duo track came up. Jungkook looked across the table at Taehyung. "I want to write it with him." No one argued. The writing sessions were long, emotional, sometimes tense, but in every line they found pieces of their story, not the version the world saw but the real one, the misunderstandings, the late-night confessions, the near losses, and the choice to stay. The song was called "Stand Beside You." When it released, the world listened. And when they performed it live for the first time, under a single spotlight, the audience fell into absolute silence. Taehyung's voice trembled on the second verse. Jungkook reached out, not for drama, not for fan service, but because he meant it. His fingers brushed Taehyung's, and this time Taehyung didn't pull away. They finished the song, hand in hand. It wasn't planned, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, there was nothing left to hide. Only what was still ahead of them. Together, the applause after their performance didn't immediately register for either of them. They stood in the spotlight, still hand in hand, breaths shallow, hearts loud. The final note lingered somewhere in the air between them, not fully released, not yet settled. Taehyung's eyes were glossy under the glow, not from sadness but from the sheer weight of relief. It was the kind of moment that felt like an answer to every unanswered question, to every unspoken apology, to every moment they could have given up and didn't. Jungkook looked down at their interlocked fingers before glancing up. Taehyung was already looking at him, and this time the silence between them did ache, it healed. They didn't smile. There was no need. Some moments didn't require performance. Some just needed to be felt. As they walked off stage together, The hum of the crowd fatting behind them, staff parted to let them pass. The rest of the members were waiting backstage, faces a blend of quiet admiration and restrained emotion. Jimin was the first to step forward, his expression unguarded, his smile laced with affection. He pulled both of them into a brief, tight hug without saying a word. Namjoon clapped Jungkook's shoulder. Jin let out a soft that was beautiful, while Yoongi and Hoseok nodded, eyes glimmering with something they didn't need to verbalize. Once they were alone in the dressing room, the silence returned, but this time it was gentle. Taehyung sat on the couch, pulling off his in-ears, eyes flicking to the floor as though trying to process the emotional aftershock. Jungkook stood at the vanity, his hands trembling slightly as he removed his mic pack. "That was something," Jungkook said almost to himself. Taehyung exhaled slowly. "Yeah." There were so many things they could say, about what the performance meant, about how far they had come, about the mess and the growth and the long nights between that first fracture and now. But they didn't. Not yet. Because they had learned that some things were better left suspended in the space between two hearts learning to trust again. Instead, Jungkook turned around and reached into his bag, pulling out a small, worn notebook. Taehyung blinked at it as Jungkook walked over and handed it to him. "I was going to give this to you earlier, but I wasn't ready, not until now." Taehyung took the notebook carefully, running his fingers over the soft cover. He opened it slowly. Inside were pages of lyrics, some scratched out, some left unfinished. Interspersed between them were letters. Little paragraphs, some written like diary entries, others like confessions. Each one dated, some from months ago, some from years ago, some from the very days when they weren't speaking, when they were pretending everything was fine, when they were standing on opposite sides of the stage. Taehyung's throat tightened as he read one. "December 12th, I wanted to text you today, just to say hi. I didn't. I stared at your name on my screen for 20 minutes and chickened out. I hope you're sleeping okay." Another. "January 3rd, we laughed today. Not a big thing, just a shared glance during rehearsal, but it felt like something, like a piece of us still remembers." And another. "March 18th, when you didn't stand next to me, it broke something I thought was unbreakable. But I understand now. I forgive you. I hope one day you forgive me too." Taehyung closed the notebook gently, holding it to his chest for a moment. "Why did you keep these?" he asked, voice strained. "Because I didn't know how else to hold on," Jungkook whispered. "I thought if I lost you completely, at least I'd still have this." Taehyung didn't speak. Instead, he walked forward and wrapped his arms around Jungkook, pulling him into a slow, silent embrace. It wasn't desperate. It wasn't apologetic. It was grounding. A reminder that they were still here, still choosing each other. Jungkook's arms found their way around him too, and for the first time in a long while their hearts beat in sync, not just in rhythm but in meaning. That night neither of them went back to their separate rooms. They stayed in the studio lounge, curled on opposite ends of the same couch, the sound of soft instrumental music playing in the background. They spoke for hours, about everything, about nothing, about their fears and dreams and what it meant to love someone through change. Taehyung admitted he had written songs he never showed anyone, about Jungkook, about the silence, about the guilt. Jungkook admitted he had tried therapy quietly after one of their biggest fights, needing someone to help him navigate the grief of losing someone still alive in his life. They cried quietly, one at a time, and they listened. For the first time in a long time, they truly listened. When the sun began to rise, they walked outside. The air was cold but soft, wrapped in the gold-pink hue of dawn. The city below hadn't fully awakened yet, and for a few rare minutes, the world felt like it belonged only to them. "You think we'll ever mess up this bad again?" Taehyung asked, watching his breath curl in the air. "Probably," Jungkook replied, "but now we know how to come back." Taehyung smiled, turning to face him. "Promise me something." "Anything. Even when it gets hard again, even when we fall apart. Let's not go silent, let's not disappear." Jungkook nodded slowly, No more silence. Their hands brushed again, not intentional but not accidental either, and neither of them pulled away. Weeks turned into months, promotions came and went. They traveled, performed, gave interviews, but something in them had shifted permanently. A kind of settled peace had taken root, quiet but unshakable. They no longer feared the cameras catching too much or too little. They no longer worried about fan interpretations. They were no longer performing closeness, they were living it. During a variety segment where each member had to describe another using one word, Taehyung turned to Jungkook and said, "Anchor." Jungkook blinked, caught off guard. Why? Because even when we drifted, part of me always stayed tied to you. Jungkook smiled, a slow curve of warmth spreading across his face. Then I guess I'm the lucky one. And he meant it. Because through every storm, every misunderstanding, every distance, Taehyung had never truly let go. Neither had he. They had stumbled, yes, fallen, bled. But they had learned that love in its truest form doesn't vanish when it's bruised. It lingers, it evolves, it waits for you to return. And they had to each other, to themselves, to the stage where it all began. But now they stood side by side, not as performers playing parts, but as people who had broken and rebuilt something even stronger, together. The quiet lingered even as they returned inside, shoes damp from the early dew clinging to the rooftop tiles. The sun hadn't fully pierced the sky yet, but its presence was undeniable, soft rays brushing against glass and steel, warming the sharp edges of the city. Taehyung sat back on the couch and leaned into the silence, his fingers moving over his phone screen without typing, without purpose. Jungkook brewed coffee in the kitchenette, the hiss of steam briefly the loudest sound in the room. It wasn't awkward. It was just slow, gentle, like breathing again after holding your lungs still for too long. He placed a mug in front of Taehyung but didn't sit down immediately. Instead, he stood across from him, unsure, fidgeting with the hem of his sleeve the way he always did when he wanted to say something but couldn't find the entrance. Taehyung noticed. He always noticed. "You're thinking too hard," he said softly, not looking up. Jungkook smiled faintly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I was just wondering if it's okay to feel this. Normal again." Taehyung looked at him then, eyes unreadable. "It's not normal, it's new. That's different." Jungkook finally sat, "Still feels fragile." "It is," Taehyung agreed, "but so are most things that matter." That afternoon, management scheduled them for a press shoot. It wasn't anything emotionally heavy, just a magazine cover, clean and neutral with a short video segment afterward. The stylist handed Taehyung a tailored brown jacket, the same color as the one Jungkook had worn in a viral airport photo weeks earlier. When he caught his reflection in the mirror, he hesitated. Then he turned to the stylist and said quietly, "Can I switch? Something less matching." Jungkook overheard. When Taehyung emerged later in a dark green coat, he caught Jungkook's glance in the mirror but neither said anything. It wasn't tension, it was something else. Later during the shoot, the director instructed them to stand on opposite ends of the group for balance. Jungkook obeyed without question. So did Taehyung. The formation was clean, symmetrical, aesthetically safe. But when the cameras flashed, Jungkook felt the distance in his chest again, not in meters, in meaning. They had mended what was broken, but there were still ghosts in the spaces between. After the final shot, when the group was dismissed to the green room, Jungkook lingered behind. He paced slowly along the length of the white backdrop, his hands shoved into his pockets, the artificial lights above humming like they were watching. Taehyung found him there minutes later, alone and backlit, expression far away. "You okay?" Jungkook didn't answer at first. Then he turned and asked, "Do you still feel like we have to be careful around each other?" Taehyung's brow furrowed. "Not careful, just mindful. Why?" "Because sometimes I feel like you're still afraid to stand next to me, like you're measuring the air between us." Taehyung looked down at his hands. "I don't mean to, it's not you, it's just, leftover fear, like if we get too close too fast, we'll snap again. I don't want to keep performing distance, Jungkook said quietly. Not when we've worked so hard to come back. Taehyung's voice was even softer. Then tell me where to start. Start by not switching jackets next time. Taehyung blinked, then a laugh escaped him, unexpected but real. He covered his mouth with the back of his hand, eyes crinkling. You noticed. Of course I noticed, Jungkook said, stepping closer. I notice everything when it comes to you. That's never changed. Taehyung's smile faltered, replaced with something softer. Graver, he looked up. I'll stop walking away first then, even when I want to. Jungkook stepped even closer, enough that the shadows between them disappeared. And I'll stop assuming you want me to. In the days that followed, something shifted again. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but meaningfully. During the next variety shoot, when given freedom to pick positions, Taehyung stood next to Jungkook without pause. When the members took selfies, he leaned in naturally, laughing at something Jungkook whispered just off mic. During a dance practice, Jungkook handed Taehyung his water bottle without needing to be asked, and Taehyung drank from it absent-mindedly. It wasn't staged. It wasn't performed. It was just muscle memory beginning to repair itself. Fans noticed the little things first. The comments rolled in. They're soft again. Whatever happened, they're healing. I don't know why, but I feel safe seeing them together. Behind the scenes, they began writing again. This time not for release, just for themselves. It became a ritual. Taehyung would bring sketches of melodies late at night. Jungkook would build harmonies over them while perched barefoot on the mixing desk. Their laughter often interrupted the flow. So did silences, but neither felt heavy anymore. One night, Taehyung handed him a lyric draft written in delicate cursive, slightly smudged. Jungkook read it twice, his voice catching. Even when you couldn't see me, I stayed where your shadow fell. He looked up. Taehyung just nodded once, then said, that was always true. And Jungkook didn't reply. He just reached over and held his wrist gently for a moment, thumb brushing the place where his pulse fluttered. That was the reply. The group traveled abroad for a tour shortly after. Long flights, hotel corridors, sleepless nights. But this time, something in the atmosphere felt more grounded. Jungkook and Taehyung found themselves side by side more often, not because they were told to be, but because they chose to be. During one interview, the host asked a familiar question. What's your favorite moment with each other that fans don't know about? Taehyung and Jungkook glanced at each other. This time, Taehyung spoke first. There's a lot, he said, lips curving. But I think it's the silences, the ones we don't run from anymore. The host blinked, confused, but Jungkook smiled, finishing for him. Sometimes the quiet says more than we ever could. And that was that. Months passed, then a year, and their bond, though scarred, held fast. They wrote a second duet. This time, the theme wasn't reconciliation. It was endurance. The night before it released, they listened to the final master together. Alone in a quiet room, legs stretched across a tangle of cushions, hearts soft from the memories stitched into the lyrics. When it ended, Jungkook turned to Taehyung, gaze unreadable. Do you regret how we got here? Taehyung shook his head. Not anymore, because now we know we can survive it. Jungkook leaned his head on Taehyung's shoulder without warning, tired but content. Let's never be afraid of standing next to each other again. Taehyung rested his cheek atop Jungkook's hair, closing his eyes. Promise. And outside, the city breathed on, unaware of how many things had broken and been rebuilt in silence. But they knew. They remembered. And they would never forget what it meant to choose each other, even when the world was watching and especially when it wasn't. The night after their new duet dropped, neither of them slept. Not because of nerves, not because of the charts, but because something about the release felt different this time. There was no rush of validation needed, no fear of being misunderstood. Instead, there was peace, quiet, earned, and long overdue. Jungkook stayed in the lounge long after the others had retired, stretched out on the leather couch with a blanket tucked around his legs, earbuds in, replaying the final mix one more time. It wasn't about finding flaws. It was about remembering how far they'd come to be able to sing those words and mean them. Taehyung returned to the room close to dawn. He had gone for a walk alone, camera slung across his chest, the city still wrapped in shadows. When he stepped into the studio, his coat smelled faintly of wind and roasted chestnuts from a nearby streetcar. Jungkook looked up and offered a small smile without saying anything. Taehyung placed his camera down and sat beside him on the floor, back against the couch, legs stretched out, fingers brushing the edge of the speaker. They listened together like that, barely speaking, bodies worn down from rehearsals and emotion but souls strangely light. In that stillness, they shared something that had taken years to rebuild. Not just trust, not just love, but the willingness to be seen, fully, without armor. When the sun finally cut through the blinds, Taehyung whispered, "Do you ever wish we had never broken at all?" Jungkook let the question hang between them. His voice was quiet but sure. "No, because I think we needed to break, to figure out how much we mattered." Taehyung turned his head slowly, meeting his gaze. "Did you ever stop believing in us?" "Only when I thought you did." Taehyung gave a sad smile. "I never did." "Then why did it feel like you left me?" "Because I didn't know how to stay when I didn't know who I was anymore," Taehyung admitted. "You kept moving forward, and I felt stuck in a version of myself I didn't recognize." Jungkook reached down and placed a hand over Taehyung's wrist, gently grounding him. "Then, why didn't you just tell me?" "Because I didn't think I deserved your understanding." "But you did," Jungkook said. "You always did." They didn't speak for a long time after that, just sat there as the city outside came alive. In the weeks that followed, their bond became something different. Not like before, not the effortless ease of youth when connection came without consequence. This time it was intentional, grown, chosen. They stopped waiting for people to place them next to each other. Instead, they stood beside each other when it mattered. During press runs, Taehyung began to reach for Jungkook first. During rehearsals, Jungkook would glance his way and wordlessly adjust so Taehyung felt seen, protected. They moved like a team, not because they had to, because they finally wanted to again. Then came the documentary. HYBE had been filming them for over a year, quietly compiling footage. None of the members knew what would be included. The final edit was screened in private before the official release, just them and a handful of trusted producers. Jungkook hadn't expected to feel anything watching it. He was wrong. In one segment, they replayed footage from the peak of their distance. The tour footage where Taehyung stood on the far side of the stage, eyes cold, mouth tight. Then a clip from an airport where neither acknowledged the other. Then an interview where the two of them gave vague, polite answers when asked about working together again. And finally, the moment Taehyung refused to stand beside him. The air in the room tightened. No one spoke. Jungkook kept his face neutral but his hands curled in his lap. But then the footage shifted, to the quiet conversation at the rooftop, to the second song studio session, to a live performance where Taehyung had reached back and gently guided Jungkook forward when he missed a beat. The producer had titled the chapter, "When We Stopped Pretending." Taehyung looked down, his jaw clenched. Jungkook's throat was dry. After the screening, the room emptied slowly. Jungkook didn't move. Taehyung remained in his seat, staring blankly at the darkened screen. "I hated watching that," he finally said. "It felt like I was watching myself disappear." "But you came back," Jungkook replied, "and so did I." "I was so cruel," Taehyung whispered. "I didn't mean to be, but I was. I know I was." "And I was silent when I should have spoken," Jungkook said. "We both messed up." Taehyung turned to him, "But I never stopped caring." "I know." A long pause. "Thank you for forgiving me," Taehyung added, voice low. "Thank you for giving me a reason to," Jungkook replied. They left together, walking side by side in the quiet corridor, their shoulders brushing every few steps. It was a silent vow, no more pretending, no more silence, no more standing apart because of fear. The documentary aired weeks later. The response was explosive. Fans cried, articles poured out, clips were dissected. But the one scene that stood out to everyone was when Taehyung placed a hand on Jungkook's back during rehearsal, right after a mistake, and said, "You're allowed to get tired. I'll hold you up when you do." That line trended for days. During their next fan meeting, a question was submitted anonymously. "Are you two okay now, really?" Taehyung looked at Jungkook, and Jungkook smiled before answering. "We're better than okay. We're honest now." And that was enough. They began traveling more as a duo for projects. It wasn't planned. It just happened. A photo shoot in Tokyo, a recording trip in New York, a short vacation in Lisbon where they were spotted by fans sitting on a park bench, laughing over gelato, heads close. They stopped hiding that they meant something to each other. At one point, Taehyung posted a photo on Instagram. Just the skyline of Seoul from a high balcony, two mugs in frame, side by side. Jungkook commented, "My cup was fuller." Taehyung replied, "That's because I poured some of mine into yours." The comment section melted. But away from the noise and the stillness of their world, they continued to do the real work. The quiet work, learning how to navigate disagreements without walls, how to express hurt without retreating, how to say, "I need you," without shame. One night after a long day of shooting, they found themselves alone in the van, city lights rolling past like stars. "Do you ever think," Taehyung said, voice soft, "what would have happened if we hadn't fixed this?" Jungkook looked out the window. "Yeah, sometimes. And I think I would have learned how to live with the pain, but not without looking for you in every room." Taehyung turned, resting his head on the seat. "I think I would have built a wall so high no one could get in again." "Then I'm glad we broke first," Jungkook said. "So am I." The road ahead wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And from that moment on, they stopped being afraid of standing beside each other, on stage, off stage, in life. Because the truth was, they had always stood together. Even when it hurt. Especially then, their return to Seoul felt quieter than expected. No welcome crew at the airport, no flashing lights, just a sleepy dusk settling over the tarmac and the low hum of engines cooling as the private flight taxied into position. Taehyung stood by the window, hoodie pulled up, eyes on the curve of the mountains in the distance. Jungkook remained seated near the back of the cabin, legs stretched out, one AirPod in, fingers lightly tapping against the armrest as a piano instrumental played in his ear. It wasn't silence that filled the space between them now. It was something warmer, something lived in, like breath after drowning. The van ride back to the dorm was brief. They didn't speak much, just exchanged glances now and then, half smiles, the kind of looks that said enough. The city blurred by in familiar lights, their reflections fractured across the window glass. As they approached the dorm, Taehyung leaned closer to the window and whispered something Jungkook almost didn't catch. "Do you think they'll ask us again?" Jungkook turned his head slightly. "Ask what?" "To split us, to keep the peace." The weight behind the question settled between them. "No," Jungkook said after a beat. "Not anymore, because there's nothing to split, there's no war." Taehyung didn't answer, but his posture softened. As they stepped out and into the cool night air, their fingers brushed. Not intentional, not staged, but neither pulled away. Inside, the dorm was dark except for the hallway light left on by someone. The others were still abroad or catching a later flight. The quiet felt sacred. Taehyung disappeared into the kitchen, pulling out 2 bottles of water from the fridge, while Jungkook kicked off his shoes and flopped onto the couch with a low groan, arms stretched above his head. "I miss this couch," Jungkook muttered. Taehyung laughed softly and tossed him a bottle. You miss the couch more than me. I didn't say that. You didn't deny it either. Jungkook cracked the cap and took a sip, watching Taehyung lower onto the opposite end of the couch. His legs draped over the side, one knee bent lazily, hand absently scrolling through his phone. They sat like that for a while, knees almost touching, no rush to move or speak. Eventually, Jungkook said, I don't know how we made it back. Taehyung glanced at him. We didn't, we made something new. Jungkook nodded thoughtful, better. Deeper, Taehyung corrected, because now it holds weight. Jungkook shifted, sitting up, his tone suddenly quieter. Sometimes I wonder if people know how close we came to not speaking again. They don't need to, Taehyung said. They only need to know we chose each other anyway. And they had, again and again, even when it was inconvenient, even when pride told them not to. They chose to reach across the space, even when it hurt.